Greetings and welcome. Happy Friday. Marc Patrone with you. So very glad that you could join us on this live transmission. I'm coming to you from the little community of Clarkson, which is part of Mississauga, the greater Toronto area. And I'm conversing with my new buddies over at Western Standard. Derek Fildebrandt, of course, who's the publisher of that online publication, and Dave Naylor, a guy I used to work with at another publication, which shall remain. I don't know if you really want to go there, Dave, but we were there together for a while, and I don't hear you. I see your lips move, buddy.
Dave, you're muted.
All right. Well,
let's just leave it to name.
It's so far in the past, right?
Guys, there are worse publications than The Sun, I'm going to call it.
Absolutely, there are. But
there are worse publications.
There aren't worse than the Toronto Star.
No, that's
excuse me, but I don't know. But and how now all these guys are going for more government money. Western Standard, of course, covered that story. These guys are having all sorts of problems. I mean, we could go on at length about how difficult things are for media right now.
We should actually add that as a topic. I think. I know it's not.
You know what, Derek?
Topics, but I think we should.
Absolutely. Look, this is the first time we're doing this, so we're just kind of feeling each other out. Not literally. But we're getting acquainted with the whole technology of doing this stuff online. I'm a radio guy. Many of my listeners normally would be listening on Saga 960, a terrific radio show that we do in the GTA. And of course, it's available to anybody listening online on Saga 960 am.ca. But the number of topics that we have to talk about, a lot of people in the West are looking at this new blue party out here and wondering what the hell's going on. Listen, when we elected Doug Ford in Ontario, guys, a lot of us in the conservative media were quite happy about that. We thought, great, after 14, 15 years of liberal government in Ontario, we're finally getting one of our own in there, somebody who's going to believe in the kinds of things that conservatives believe in. Derek, Dave, I mean, we want lower taxes, we want less regulation, we want more focus on self-reliance, we want less government in our hair. What did we end up with? None of the above. Now you got to cut Doug a little bit of slack here, guys, because of COVID. But Doug has shown very little inclination to be a small government guy. And out of the blue, we have Jim Karahalios and his new blue party. A lot of people are excited about that. Although I suspect that the Conservative Party itself is looking at the new blue party and thinking, are these guys going to, chip into our support base in Ontario? Because we certainly don't need that, meaning the Conservative Party does not need that. But that's the situation here. I don't know. Do you guys think that it's looking like a new Wildrose? Is that what you're referring to? Let's start with you, Derek. You're thinking that the new blue could be the Ontario's version of Wildrose?
It's difficult to say. I mean, Ontario doesn't have quite the same tradition as Alberta or the prairies in general have with inventing and experimenting with new political parties. Ontario was founded on not experimenting with new things. It was founded as the loyalists who weren't into the American Revolution. But I've got a soft spot for Ontario, especially rural Ontario, where I'm from. I think there's clearly room, there's political space for a new party in Ontario. I feel like you about Doug Ford. I was quite optimistic about him when he came in. He was supposed to be populist, anti-establishment conservative, not beholden to the big blue machine. And he's proven to be anything but. One of his first acts in the first few months was to punt Randy Hillier from the PC caucus. Randy Hillier's member of the provincial parliament from the Ottawa Valley, most notoriously conservative part of Ontario, arguably of Canada. And he was punted for not being a drone, essentially. He has since then punted several members of the PC caucus for disagreeing with extreme draconian lockdowns, throwing people in jail for operating their businesses. So there's clearly, he hasn't gotten spending under control. He hasn't gotten taxes under control. There's clearly a lot of ideological space for a new party there. But Ontario has a much less successful history of new insurgent political parties, particularly on the right. When the Reform Party was created, it completely replaced the PC party out west. In large measure, it also replaced the NDP out west federally. It had much less success east of Manitoba, and because Ontarians who consider themselves conservative often define themselves conservatism as, well, whatever the Conservative Party stands for. And I look at the Ontario Conservative Party and say, well, I don't see almost anything that would reflect someone like me in that right now. So it's hard to say. I think there's ideological space for it. The question is, are people going to look at this as a credible and viable option for replacing Doug Ford?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are disgruntled with the move that you just talked about here in terms of what Doug Ford has brought in. Randy Hillier, I'm glad you brought him up. There's Roman Baber, of course, he was just turfed as well. These are individuals who've now become a real thorn in the side of the Doug Ford government as he tries to make the case for stricter lockdowns in the face of more and more opposition and more videos that we're seeing. Every other day you're seeing videos of people being treated very, very badly. This latest video out of Barrie, which is just north of Toronto, shows a guy being tackled by police. He was a skateboarder. He's a 20-year-old. I mean, people are getting pictures of this stuff, and I'm glad they are doing it because Lord knows through social media, we can watch what's happening. We can look at some of the things that police are doing, and people are they can't believe it. It's like watching a movie, or it's like watching newsreels out of East Germany, or someplace like that in the past, or the old Soviet bloc where people were treated like garbage. It's extremely troubling. And Dave, you and I have talked about some of the things that have happened in Alberta, for instance, where people flying in are found to have had the wrong COVID test. Same thing here happened at Pearson Airport in Toronto, where a guy from Scarborough came in. Apparently he had the wrong COVID test, ended up being basically locked in a room with bread and water. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. And Dave, how much of a problem has this been? I mean, is this sinking into the psycho of individuals, the psyche rather of individuals in Alberta? Are they looking at this and thinking, this can't be allowed to continue?
Well, it's certainly drawn the interest of Albertans, that's for sure. The stories we did over the weekend on these secret airport detentions, set a record number of hits for us at the Western Standard. But other than individual Canadians clicking on a story and feeling outraged, it's been pretty well radio silence for most of the political leadership in the country. Justin Trudeau issued a very sort of wishy-washy tweet saying, he thinks there should be more transparency. But there's been nothing from Erin O'Toole, nothing from Justin Trudeau. I watched that Barrie video this morning with the young gentleman getting, hit in the face with a taser, not tased in the face, but actually struck with the weapon. It's quite scary what's going on out there. That's for sure, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. And the media. Let's talk a little bit about that because more layoffs announced. Bell Media closing the CTV National, of course, which is part of the Bell Media empire, has closed their Quebec bureau, cutting staff at radio stations. There's talk of radio stations going dark. And I'm looking at what's going on and asking myself, okay, yeah, these guys have gone to government more and more. Western Standard, of course, did an excellent story about that. They're getting more money. And what are they losing in, what's the bargain here? What are they giving up? And the answer, of course, and Derek, you know this, having started this organization online, is credibility, right? Once you, as a media organization, begin to take cash from the government, you become reliant on that government. The next thing you know, you become very reticent about criticizing that government. So the whole point of people tuning in to a media organization to try and get some accountability out of their government, that goes out the window. Why? Because media organizations are less and less willing to go hammer and tong after governments that abuse the public purse. And I think we're seeing that. And that, I believe, is part of the reason why more and more people are bailing out of the mainstream media. And how is that being tried? People are going to blame COVID. I get that. The The ad revenues for many of these radio stations and television stations, for instance, is cratered as a result of COVID. But I think the rot had already settled in terms of media becoming more and more reliant on government. And what suffers is credibility, right? And so as that credibility erodes, people stop tuning in. They look for media elsewhere. And it's just a cycle that is created here, whereby you lose viewers because your credibility is shot. You rely on government for more money, and guess what happens? Your credibility suffers even more. I mean, is this what we're talking about here in this current media environment, Derek?
Well, part of me loves watching these big media bosses grovel on their knees to Justin Trudeau asking for more money.
It's sadistic or what? I mean, go ahead.
I've said before, I'm a collapsitarian in many senses. I'm happy to see things get worse so that people eventually reach a breaking point. Look, these guys surrendered. Most of them have surrendered their credibility a very long time ago. The media is becoming increasingly like another Bombardier in Canada, where they don't actually produce anything. They just collect subsidies and have make-work projects. People are tuning out in huge numbers from the mainstream media because they don't trust it anymore. Now, a lot of the alternative media is trying to fill the void, but a lot of that alternative media also lacks credibility because maybe they might have weaker standards and on the objectivity of their news and whatnot. We rectified that at the very beginning of the Western Standard by having Dave Naylor come in, an immensely respected reporter coming in from the mainstream media, bringing that kind of level of credibility to us, but without having the paymasters of government and special interest groups telling us what we need to do. So what we've got now is after the $600 million was not enough, just as $1 billion is never enough for Bombardier. It's always going to be more and more and more. You've now got a media that is like Bombardier and many other industries in Canada, not just to pick on them, that are in the rent-seeking business. They're in the subsidy collecting business. They're not actually producing anything anymore. And that is increasingly becoming the mainstream media in Canada. So on the one hand, I'm happy to see them grovel and continue to surrender what last vestiges of dignity and credibility they have left. But on the other hand, I mean, the Western Standard is pledged from in our mission statement to never accept government funding. And we will never accept government funding. But this puts us at a permanent competitive disadvantage to our competitors in the mainstream media who are in the government subsidy business. And that makes it harder for us to compete. What we're doing right now, what the government is doing, is subsidizing candles when the light bulb has already been invented. The Western Standard and other alternative media on left and right are the light bulb, and they're just delaying the inevitable. They're making it difficult from a purely market and economics perspective for the new, young, scrappy, dynamic, and inventive and competitive players to emerge into the market and take our rightful place. But all they're doing is delaying the inevitable. These guys, soon enough, are just going to continue to shed jobs no matter how many subsidies they get. They're going the way of the dodo. The Western Standard, despite the competitive disadvantage we're at for not accepting government subsidies, we're turning a corner. We're on our way to becoming financially viable here. And we do that, I guess, shameless sales pitch here, by having a large number of members joining us, voluntarily paying for the content they get from the Western Standard, and not by us going to the government with a tin can and asking Justin Trudeau if we can please have some more.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch how the other media have been reacting, because Western Standard, of course, has broken a number of key stories that by all rights should have been picked up. Dave, you've been instrumental in writing about these stories that you would expect, your buddies at Post Media would snap up, but it's not happening. It's like the media is looking at these stories and going, well, they're pretty good, but rather than following them up and basically crediting Western Standard for breaking it in the first place, they would rather just kind of ignore it. And it reminds me a little bit about what big tech did in terms of squelching and suppressing some of the stories that were potentially damaging to the Biden campaign. In a way, they're kind of serving the same purpose here, Dave. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, sorry, but before Dave comes in here, I want to just add that in. I don't want to take Dave's time here, but the media often don't report on stories broken by the alternative media for one reason or another. But actually, the Western Standard is in a bit of a different classification here. We do break stories that the mainstream media do often pick up on. Dave, in particular, breaks big stories. The mainstream media are ignoring them because they have a blind spot. They can't see that 50 or 60% of people are actually interested in this topic. So let's take, for example, the secret detention of Canadians returning from abroad and being thrown forcefully into these isolation centers or detention centers, and their families not being informed. Dave broke that story for us, and the mainstream media didn't touch it for 3 days, but they eventually did pick it up. This has happened on a lot of fronts where we have a story and it sits out there for several days because they don't think it's important, but the social media managers and the editors in these big newsrooms, they keep on seeing this stuff come through their social media feeds. They see that people are talking about it. And so, they might not want to talk about this stuff, or they might not think it's good news or important, but it turns out it is. So the Western Standard's kind of in a unique category among the non-mainstream media, where we're not totally lumped in with the rest of the alternative, where when we break stuff, it often does go mainstream. It just sometimes takes a little while. But I think that's a good segue for Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I've given up long ago, Mark, trying to figure out what the mainstream media is doing and thinking about. And I think it's just a case, like when we broke the story on the weekend about the secret airport detentions, that had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of clicks and hundreds of shares on social media. So the word quickly got out. And then Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, threw his 2 cents worth in. So you've got the Premier of the province commenting on your story. At that point, the mainstream media has no choice. They cannot continue to ignore us or ignore what we're doing. They have to do the story. So you know what? Let them do it that way. If they, we're not going anywhere. We're in here for the long haul. Instead of always asking for bailouts, why don't they do what the Western Standard's doing, Mark, and go knock on doors and sell advertising? Right? And that's, back in the old days, that's the way it used to be. You'd call up a car dealership and say, "Hey, do you want to advertise?" Or a stereo shop, "Hey, do you want to advertise your big woofer?" Mainstream media.
I'm going to put that in Dave's all-time best quotes. Do you want to advertise big woofer?
Big woofer. Yeah. Okay.
You're no longer Nobby. You're Dave Big Woofer Naylor.
Dave Big Woofer Naylor. I love it.
I like it. Instead of always trying to get money handed to them, go out and try and earn it. Surely that's a better business.
Well, you know what, Dave? I think they're done. Look, once you've begun the process of taking money, once you've taken money from government, where do you go from there? It's like you've taken a bite of the apple, right? It's like the devil has tempted you with this juicy apple. Oh, go on, take a bite. Take a bite. You really want to. Well, once you take a bite of that, your credibility is immediately brought into question in the eyes of the public. There is no going back. I don't think you can go back.
You can't try heroin casually. I mean, this is not.
Thank you.
There's no casual heroin or meth users out there. You try it, you're into it, and you're addicted to it, and everything else falls by the wayside. So, in this, I'm a big fan of Breaking Bad, and right now, Trudeau is Heisenberg. He's selling. He doesn't use it himself, but he's selling it and he's pushing it. He's got a good product, and it's called government cash. And anyone who gets addicted to government cash is no longer a sovereign, free individual. And the same applies to people. The same applies to government. And absolutely, media.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about this story, guys. I know it's one that you're feeling a little bit reticent about, but I think it's weird. I think it says a lot about the government in terms of what they feel is important versus what most Canadians. So I think is important. And I started off my radio show with this. Do you think that you can put on a Proud Boys t-shirt emblazoned with a pride flag? Now you think about, try to picture this, a Proud Boys t-shirt logo emblazoned with a pride flag. I mean, can you still potentially be arrested and suspected as a suspected terrorist in Canada? We know, of course, that is one of 13 groups that have been labeled in that way by the government. But does the pride flag cancel out or inoculate you against being called a terrorist? Do you get a pass? I mean, no, think about this. If you're a male, if you're a guy, a dude, and you're a believer and follower in the pride movement, does that mean that you can call yourself a proud boy without being called a proud boy? If you know, look, it's a minor distinction, but it's huge. And I happen to think that you can walk around in some of the gay areas, perhaps in Calgary or in Edmonton or maybe right here in Toronto, and you can walk around with a Proud Boy shirt and maybe even a MAGA hat, and they're going to consider that to be ironic. You can get away with it in those communities. You leave those communities, all of a sudden, well, all bets are off. You can get arrested. But I don't know. Do you think that this is an issue, or am I just barking up the wrong tree? Silence.
Oh, sorry. Who were you asking?
Well, all right. Let's start off with Dave, because he's got a grin on his face right now. He probably thinks, Patrone, drop the subject. But I got to go there. Can you wear a Proud Boy T-shirt with a pride flag and get away with it?
I guess it depends whether or not you're wearing your face mask.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I guess, the answer to your question is I don't know. Who knows what goes on these days, Mark, in this country, right? You just never know. I'll just speak for Calgary. We really haven't seen a lot from the Proud Boys. They have provided security at some anti-masking rallies, but hasn't really been a big issue out here.
Look, my question is, why are these guys being treated as a terrorist organization? As far as I know, they've never done anything here. And as a matter of fact, I'm hearing reports that they may have even furnished the police with intelligence. Have you guys heard this? I mean, in the United States, they've been FBI informants. And so now all of a sudden they're treated as a terrorist group. I'm just saying that the government went too far. We don't know enough about this in order to be labeling groups, like Proud Boys terrorism, because as far as I know, they've never committed any group. I don't know. Maybe they're going to go after the Shriners next. I want to talk about this latest poll.
Sorry, before
you wanted to weigh in?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's my station. I get to talk when I want.
I didn't think you wanted to touch that with a 10-foot pole. You were there silent in the corner.
I just, it's not an area of focus for me, but
yeah.
I mean, a lot of qualified experts in terrorism have said that this is probably the wrong move. The Proud Boys have been a nebulous organization. It started off as, if we can call it kind of a fight club for young men, just kind of disenfranchised, angry young guys, a social club of some sorts where they might get into fights and whatnot. But the bar for a terrorist organization is, since then they have morphed into something that I think is significantly darker. I think the organization has morphed, as organizations do, particularly decentralized organizations. But there is a difference between organizations with people that we disagree with, even very strongly, and a terrorist organization. There is normally a very specific bar for that. And for good reason. In Canada and in the States, we generally leave it to authorities, non-political authorities, to make that determination, to determine what is a terrorist organization or not. So Antifa, for example, commits all sorts of violence regularly. It's a part of their raison d'etre. But they don't really have much of a hierarchy. They have little local cells. But I think it'd be wrong probably to classify them as a terrorist organization, at least having politicians do it. And this was an act of parliament passed by all parties in the House of Commons to declare Proud Boys a terrorist organization. I think it was a political stunt. I think you could strongly disagree with much of what the Proud Boys do without believing that politicians should get into the business of this, because I consider people in Antifa do commit acts that are arguably of terror, but I'm not sure that Antifa itself is a terrorist organization on par with ISIS or Al-Qaeda. So it's a very dangerous game that they're playing. Most terrorism experts believe that this was a wrong move, that it was just purely politically motivated, and that all this is going to do is push people underground and potentially radicalize people further. Because if there are people in that organization who aren't too far gone, but all of a sudden the government is saying your very existence is illegal, you actually have now the real risk of radicalizing people. And we should have learned this after September 11th, where certainly certain organizations were classified as terrorist organizations, and that was rightfully so. But other organizations that have odious beliefs, supporting Sharia law, Islamic supremacy, and things like that, their beliefs were radical, but their actions were not committing terrorism, and they would be lumped in with terrorists. And that just simply radicalized people further and created more terrorists. So I think this is an ill-informed and politically motivated move that is not going to make anything better, but it might make some politicians feel better about themselves.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is that this thing could backfire, that by declaring them a terrorist group, that what you're doing is drawing attention to what they're doing, and that if you're of a mind to get involved in groups like this, there might be somebody out there who thinks, well, there's an exciting group to get involved in. Here they are, declared a terrorist group. Man, what I'm saying? Like, you're almost focusing attention on a group that really is not very well known in this country at all. So in a way, you've given me another reason to reinforce my views that maybe the government went too far with these guys. I'm not saying that they're a bunch of Boy Scouts, but I'm saying that by labeling them terrorists, I think we might have gone too far. And to your point, maybe drawn attention that they didn't otherwise deserve. But I want to talk about this recent poll by Abacus, suggesting that the Liberals are losing a lot of support because of their handling of the vaccine issue. This Abacus poll of almost 4,000 people, guys, suggests that now the Liberals are down to 32%. They've lost 3 points in the last month. This is a party that was looking to go into an election, possibly this spring, maybe in the fall, looking at maybe gaining back that majority. And here it is, slipping away. All right. Now they're looking at, the Canadians are looking at the handling of this vaccine issue and thinking, you know what? This government really can't be trusted to manage this pandemic very well. Maybe we need to look around. And so as a result, the Liberals are losing support. And I don't know, could this be a ballot question in the coming election, guys? Do you think that this could be the thing that finally perhaps breaks the guy who had been seen as largely the Teflon prime minister, a guy who's been able to withstand all these other scandals? Is this going to be the one that finally does him in, Dave?
I think it has that potential. Absolutely, Mark. You look at all the scandals that he's had, from blackface to the We charity, and people will tut and say he shouldn't have done that, but it doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect their individual lives. But this completely botching of the vaccine rollout is hitting people personally. It's hitting everybody. Everybody either wants that vaccine, they have an elderly parent or grandparents who desperately need that vaccine, and it's not coming. And we look around the world. I think the United States injected 1 million people yesterday. Great Britain is, on their second go-round already, and we're doing absolutely terribly. And it affects every single person, every single voter, which his other scandals didn't, Mark. So I think it's got the potential to do great harm to him.
Derek, I don't know. What do you think? It looks to me that the prime minister, frankly, I'm not saying that they're quite panicking, but if you go online, for instance, and you have a guy like Aaron O'Toole, who has been thus far failing to make much attraction, as far as being seen as a guy who could be the next prime minister. Aaron O'Toole comes on, he says something about the vaccine, and he's immediately being attacked by dozens of leftist and liberal supporters saying, well, what would you do under the circumstances? That to me tells me that they're vulnerable, that they're scared, that they understand that their credibility on the vaccine issue and their handling of COVID has taken a huge hit. I mean, when you push back against anything related to attacking this prime minister on his handling of the vaccine rollout. If you push back that much, it suggests to me that you're vulnerable and that you're slightly afraid that the public backlash is going to be such that you won't be able to recover. I don't know. Is the prime minister in big trouble here over this issue politically? I'm talking.
Probably not, actually. I'm much more cynical on this. Look,
all right.
Dave is, I think, being far too kind to the average voter here. I might be a populist, but that doesn't mean I think people make the right choices often collectively. Look, Justin Trudeau, like the Liberals, will always attack the Conservatives no matter what. So when Justin Trudeau was at 50% in the polls, they still would attack whoever's the Conservative leader, saying they're dangerous. If the Conservatives get elected, they're going to take away your health care. There'll be no abortion, and taxes will be so low that everybody starves in the streets. They're going to say these things no matter how high or low they are in the polls. They just get a bit more extreme the lower they are, the closer they are to potentially losing power. The Conservatives have gained in the polls here, but remember, in the last election, Andrew Scheer's Conservatives won the popular vote, but they still lost the election badly because the votes were concentrated in Western Canada, running up big majorities in safe Conservative ridings and not where they needed to win, which is exactly where you are right now, Mark, in the 905 surrounding Toronto. That is where elections are determined. They're not determined. They're not determined in Alberta or Saskatchewan, rural Manitoba, or rural BC. They're determined in the suburbs of Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. That's it. So even if the Conservatives win the popular vote, they're still likely again to come up short of even a minority government. And even if Justin Trudeau doesn't win the most seats in the next election, that doesn't mean that Erin O'Toole gets to be prime minister automatically. Justin Trudeau would have the right to try and form some kind of coalition with other parties if it's still a minority government, and he can hold the confidence of the House. I think the federal government has botched the vaccine rollout. I think healthcare is overwhelmingly a provincial responsibility. It's provincial jurisdiction under the Constitution, and in practice. There's a lot to blame in the provinces. The premiers are most to blame for how things are delivered. The one major area here that the federal government's responsible for two things involving the pandemic: borders, where they're now essentially jailing, in very nice jails, but jails nonetheless, people traveling and not telling their families where they are. That's federal. And vaccines. That is their most direct application into this, and they've completely dropped the ball. We are now something like number 26, approaching number 30th in the world for our vaccine rollout and acquisition, and actually getting this jabbed into the arms of people who want it. So they have completely dropped the ball on it. But at the end of the day, people seem to be very forgiving of Justin Trudeau. Look at those big puppy dog eyes and that beautiful shaggy hair. And at the same time, just remember, conservatism, I think, is generally falling out of vogue in Canada. And for Conservatives to win in Canada, most of the experts say they have to be much less conservative. And I say at that point, well, what's the point of even having them? If it's just going to be more liberals in a blue jersey, there's not really a point to it. So even if the Conservatives win, conservatism doesn't win.
Boy, that level of cynicism is going to make a lot of people out here maybe consider Albertans' feelings a little bit, maybe. Come on. Are Albertans really ticked off at the fact, and you talked about this, the GT area, the 905 belt, deciding, for instance, whether or not to go with Trudeau or not? You feel that somehow, despite all these boondoggles, despite the failed rollout of the vaccine, that somehow Ontario voters are still going to look the other way and still decide ultimately that no, Trudeau is still our guy, despite all the problems this government has had. You still think that somehow people here have just not seen it, or maybe they don't want to see it. Is that what it is? I mean, what's it going to take? All right, what's it going to take for people in Ontario, people in Vancouver, people in Atlantic Canada now, where the Tories are polling in the teens, to finally see the light and get rid of this guy? What do you think, Dave?
I don't. It's a tough. I disagree with Derek. I think this vaccination thing has potential to damage Trudeau. He hasn't played his trump card of blaming Stephen Harper yet, but I'm sure that'll be coming down. That'll be coming down the pipe at some point. But Derek is right. It all comes down to those suburban ridings in the big cities, and unless people's lives are dramatically changed, then Trudeau will keep getting in. It's I don't know what the answer is. Obviously Aaron O'Toole is not setting the world on fire. Do we need to get Pierre Poilievre in there as the leader? He might show some more fire in his guts, but it's a very different political situation out here in Alberta, where we're just getting one kick in the groin after the other. The latest being the Keystone Pipeline cancellation, in which out here people in the West don't think Trudeau did enough, if anything, to try and prevent the cancellation from U.S. President Joe Biden. So it's just going to widen the political gulf in Canada again, Mark, I think.
All right. And will a Liberal majority win? Because, I mean, if you're right, Derek, and people here will continue to support Trudeau, will a Liberal majority actually push Albertans over the edge? I mean, that's the question I want answered here. Is that what it would take, do you think?
Well, I think it certainly would push support for independence higher. Does it get it over the edge? I don't think so. I think that is largely in the hands primarily of Jason Kenney and the independence movement here in Alberta. People's minds out here are already made up about Justin Trudeau. People aren't going to dislike him anymore or like him anymore, no matter what he does. He is a known quantity here. He's not an X factor anymore. The big thing is, can Jason Kenney continue to keep the very delicate coalition he has right now together over this question? Polling we've done shows that 60% or more of UCP voters would vote for independence. So they're largely split, a majority of UCP voters. Now, the UCP leadership is quite strictly federalist. Most of the caucus is federalist, although there are some sovereigntists in that caucus right now. So the big thing is, can Jason Kenney's kind of tough talk on, I'm going to get a fair deal, actually do something? I mean, we haven't had any movement on this stuff. Ottawa has not given ground anywhere. Ottawa treats Alberta worse today than it did 2.5 years ago when the UCP got elected. So he hasn't been able to show any progress on this stuff whatsoever. There is no fair deal. We're going to have a referendum in October on equalization. Albertans are going to expect Jason Kenney to get on a plane the next day, go to Ottawa, and essentially pin Justin Trudeau on the rug and give him a noogie until he agrees to change equalization. and it's not going to happen. They're going to tell us to piss off. Nothing is going to happen. And that's a moment I'm really looking towards in the future here is, are people are going to do one of three things. They're going to say, okay, well, you didn't get it, Jason, but we're still behind you. Keep fighting. That's going to be a difficult argument for Kenney to make. People could say, well, he tried. I guess we just have to accept our lot. And this is just the way it is. It's not going to change. We've tried the Reform Party. We've tried the Conservative Party of Canada. We've tried Jason Kenney with fair deals. It's not going to get anywhere. We just have to accept the status quo and move on. And just that's the way it is. Or third, people are going to do what Albertans do every once in a while and burn the house down. We've done it before. This would probably be the most radical incarnation of that. But I think it's largely now in the hands of Jason Kenney and the independence movement itself. That being said, if Aaron O'Toole wins, I think there will be a placebo effect, even if the policies don't really change. The rhetoric changes. It's the home team. It's the blue jersey. So people would probably calm down for a little bit. But none of these fundamental problems, I think, will actually change if Aaron O'Toole becomes prime minister.
And what about the Maverick Party? I mean, do you sense that that the Maverick Party is gaining any traction? is the Maverick Party going to be a factor in the coming election? I mean, one of the polls that I saw recently, guys, suggests that support for the Conservative Party has actually dipped below 50% in the 48% range because, to your point, Dave, Aaron O'Toole is just not really setting the world on fire, and that Albertans are not that keen. Yeah, they're going to do what they usually do, which is to rubber stamp their vote for the Conservative Party of Canada, but they're not particularly thrilled with Aaron O'Toole. Could that be an opening for a party like the Maverick Party, do you think?
Well, we did some recent polling, Mark, and both Wildrose Independence leader Hindman and Maverick leader Jay Hill told me that the best thing that could happen to them in terms of membership is for Trudeau to get another majority. They expect the floodgates to open and people, to break down their doors to try and join. In the polling we did, the Maverick Party really didn't register. They've said they want to run, I think, in 39 ridings to try and become the Bloc Québécois of the West, but they really didn't register on the poll, whereas the Wildrose Independence Party certainly did in provincial politics. I believe they were, and Derek will correct me, I believe they were at 9% in our polling. So I don't know if it's just the name, the Maverick Party, or they really haven't been actively out there, in my opinion. You never see any social media interaction with Jay Hill or any of the other people in the party. So it appears the Albertans are certainly more joining the independence movement on a provincial scale as opposed to a federal party scale.
And the implications of that. Okay, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons for it. Yeah, so the polling we had done from Main Street shows that within Alberta, Wildrose Independence Party was at 9% and Maverick was at 3%. 3% is within the margin of error. So they could theoretically be 6% or they could be 0%. It's barely got a pulse. And there's, I think, a few reasons for that. One is, and Dave kind of alluded to it, in my humble opinion, I think it's a silly name. Yes, I like Mavericks, but it's a strange name for a party. And I guess Wildrose is too, but Wildrose is still an established political brand here. It's a provincial symbol within Alberta. It actually means something. So I think a lot of it is the name. I think Jay Hill has added a lot to that party when he came on, because it used to be called the Wexit Party. I think he's brought a lot of credibility and professionalism to that organization that it should be very grateful to have. And another thing is, and this might cut across the conventional wisdom, yes, support for independence is higher when Justin Trudeau is in power, but among the parties themselves, I think one of the things that's driving support for Wildrose Independence Party is that the Conservatives are in power and seen by many to be failing. So just as the reform, Tom Flanagan wrote a book in the mid-90s called Waiting for the Wave, and it was about the early Reform Party. And it was Preston Manning's theory that even though the West needed the Reform Party in the 70s and early 80s, it wasn't the right time because Pierre Trudeau was in power, and the PCs would inevitably fail the West, but voters would project their hopes onto Brian Mulroney, Joe Clark, and the PCs to fix things. They needed to be given a chance to fail first, and then people would defect from the PCs. So similarly in Alberta, the Wildrose Independence Party, and before that, the party I led, which was a part of the merger that created Wildrose, the Freedom Conservative Party, people just wanted to get rid of the NDP. They hated the NDP so much that they were just willing to project all of their hopes and dreams onto the UCP and all of their anger onto the NDP. Federally, Westerners passionately hate Justin Trudeau. But even though Aaron O'Toole isn't really talking about many of these issues in a serious way that'll address Western issues, people are able to project their hopes onto him to fix things as the best chance to do it. So oddly enough, federally, for a party to take a sovereigntist Western party to take off federally, it actually might require that the Conservative Party takes power federally and have a chance to fail first before voters at a federal level are willing to switch to a sovereignist party.
Which leads to my next question, which is how big a disappointment is Jason Kenney? I mean, here's a guy that you would expect to be, front and center in terms of leading the province against the feds, and yet you still get that uneasy sense that the premier would secretly rather be in Ottawa than be in Alberta. That he saw the leadership of the merged United Conservative Party in Alberta as kind of a stepping stone, that his heart was really still back in Ottawa, where I think he spent something like 19 years or thereabouts, guys. I don't know, how big a disappointment has Jason Kenney been, and should he step down before the next provincial election? Guys, well, I don't know. What do you think? Dave?
I think the situation in Alberta is very much like what you're dealing with in Ontario market. People aren't happy because they didn't get what they thought they were voting for. Jason Kenney really hasn't stepped up to the plate in terms of fighting with Ottawa that most voters want. It seems to me that everything he's touched has turned to dust, especially in the last few months. Last year he invested $1.5 billion of taxpayers' money into the Keystone Project, and we know where that money is gone now. And all that the UCP seems to have done in their first third in power is just set up panels. Okay, we want a provincial police force. Let's form a panel to see whether that would work. There's been very, very few concrete moves. In fairness, they did announce last week the creation of the Alberta Parole Board, which is now going to take over parole issues for people in provincial jails serving 2 years less a day. But the Albertans just haven't seen the movement from Kenney that they want. Doesn't seem to be any passion. I guess his theory is to try and play nice with Trudeau and see how that works, but hasn't gotten him anywhere yet, Mark.
Yeah, what a major disappointment, because I think a lot of people had very high expectations once Jason Kenney came in. This was going to be a fighter, and I think that's really what Albertans want. I mean, obviously, I'm in Ontario right now. I lived in Calgary for a couple of years. I certainly got a sense for life in Alberta, but I think Albertans really want a scrappy fighter, a Ralph Klein. We had a Ralph Klein type of guy who's going to stand up, shake his fist at Ottawa, and really stand up to what the feds are doing to Alberta. I mean, it really feels like Alberta is more of a colony rather than a province. And I think that they have conned Albertans into believing that somehow they're this equal partner in Confederation, when in fact they're more like a colony, especially when you look at how that province has been milked over the years for billions and billions of dollars. I know you want to weigh in on this, Derek. Go right ahead.
Well, just I guess before we wrap up, all I get to say is I told you so. I bought into Kenney. I was probably one of the very, very first people in Alberta to buy into it. There were some early warning signs that I tried to bring up. But as I said earlier, people were just so angry at the NDP, they were willing to overlook anything, overlook how realistic it is that we can actually fix anything without going further than shaking our fist. But I think a lot of people are seeing it now. They're very upset. Kenney's got a very difficult task ahead of himself. He is fighting a two-front war. I've compared this to the Schlieffen Plan and the First World War. He's got. All
right. Well, the Schlieffen Plan was a success, though, wasn't it? Going around the.
It was not a success.
Imagine no line.
Nearly worked. It nearly worked. It may have been the best option they had, but it didn't work. He has kind of the French New Democrats to his left, and he's got the Russian Wildrose on its right, kind of a more barbaric, uncouth, but growing threat that takes longer to mobilize. And so he's got a war on two fronts right now that he did not believe he'd ever face once he had the merger of the original Wildrose and the PC parties done. He's in a tough pickle, and his big problem right now, he's got a Jim Prentice syndrome. He doesn't know which front to attack first, and he's got to pick one. And he's constantly just trying to balance himself. Fighting a war on two fronts is exhausting. You generally have to You got to pick one side and go after it. He's got to decide to move center and displace the New Democrats, or he's got to go right and crush the Wildrose and bring those voters home.
Well, it's been too long, I think. For him to pick a lane, because he's had no success up to this point. And Albertans, I suspect, are running out of patience. Derek, you want to throw in a plug for anybody wanting to become a Western Standard member?
Yeah, I think we're having trouble with your mic. I guess it's a good time for us to be wrapping up anyway. But yeah, I would thank all of our current Western Standard members. We're making some changes right now. In the next few days, you might have some. If you are a current Western Standard member and you have trouble logging into the Western Standard's website to read any content, just send us a message, info@westernstandardonline.com, or sorry, membership at westernstandardonline.com. Our staff will help you work through the bugs. We're making big technological changes. But yeah, grateful to our members, and make sure you guys sign up.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate this. It's been a lot of fun. Let's do it again real soon. Dave and Derek, let's sign things off for now. Bye-bye. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.